Okay, so now that we've created our database, let's modify the server.js. So the first thing we want to do is to write some code to connect to the database. So this will be the same boilerplate code we had before. I'm just going to copy and paste it in for simplicity. This will import SQLite 3 as a library and then have the DB variable refer to a new connection to the petsdb database. So we're just going to use DB through our code. The first thing we want to do is to get all the users. So recall before we had this fake database that we grabbed the keys out of. So we don't have that anymore. So let's comment this out. Let's just erase it actually. What we're going to do is we're going to do a database query. So database query, one kind of database query is to do a db.all. So what db.all does is it will run a query in SQL, the language SQL, and then run a callback function after the query finishes. So our query here is select name from users to pets. So that's a string that represents SQL code or SQL code. And the second parameter to db.all is a callback function, which is an anonymous function here, which takes in two parameters. The first parameter is error, which stands for error, and the second one is rows, which stands for all the rows of data that have been returned. So a convention a lot of these callback functions used in Node.js is that the error code or the error object is always the first parameter, and then everything else may be the data it's returned. So what this says is run this SQL query, and after it's done, run this callback function. So because everything is asynchronous in Node.js, a lot of these APIs and libraries are set up with these callback functions in mind. So one thing we can do now, let me just comment this code in the bottom because it's distracting, is to console.log rows. So what this will do is this will just console.log whatever the content of rows is to the console. And we're going to, and remember, when we visit this localhost 3000/users, we're going to hopefully see this code run. So to see the console, we switch over here, and notice how I no longer have to manually restart my server because I'm using NodeMon. So every time I save the file, the server says restarting, restarting, restarting. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close these two. I'm going to visit this URL. So when I visit this URL, I want you to pay attention to what happens in the console here. I'm going to make this purposely small so you can see. I'm going to squash this a little bit. Okay, ready? I'm going to make this really small. Okay, I'm going to press enter. I press enter. Look what happened here. Ignore that this is waiting because I actually don't have any data return. But as soon as I hit that request, it returned me a array, right? An array of 3 objects. The first object is name Philip, second name John, third name Carol. So that's what rows returned to me. But recall that I just want to get all the users' names out. I don't want these complex objects. What I really want is Philip, John, and Carol. And to do that, one compact way to do that is to use a functional programming, to use the map function. So I'm going to define all usernames as rows map e arrow e dot name. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this line. So recall that the map function will iterate through, right now the calling map on rows will iterate through the rows array, which is this one right here, right? It will iterate through every element, and every element it will assign to the variable e, the temporary variable e. So that's what the e is. And arrow means I want to create a function that takes in an e and returns e.name. So to get e.name, e.name here is Philip, e.name here is John, e.name here is Carol. This is just a shorthand for creating an anonymous function that takes in one parameter, which we call e, and then returns one thing with e.name. So a longer way to write this is to put the parentheses, put the braces, and say return e.name. This is the exact same thing. So again, when you have an anonymous function with only one parameter, you can ignore the parentheses, and when you have only one return statement, you can ignore the brackets and the return. So it makes it look really compact. Basically says, give me everything in row and pull me out the .name from every element in row. and assign it to all usernames. So all usernames should be Philip, John, and Carol. So when I save, I'm just going to console.log all usernames. And when I do that, I'm going to visit this page. Everything reloads nicely now. Visit this page. Now watch the bottom. What happens? When I go to users, presto. So this was rows. Remember, I had 3 objects. And then when I did the map, all usernames now cleanly has Philip, John, and Carol. We pulled out the name values. So after console logging all usernames, we just do a res.send to send it back to the client. Remember, console.logging doesn't do anything. It's just for debugging. You need to do a res.send in order to send it back to whoever requested that data. So I'm going to comment, delete the rest. Okay, so after we've saved this, so now this thing should work. So now when I visit this in the browser, it should send the all usernames back to the browser. Select, I'm going to visit, and there we go. Philip, John, Carol. Make the text a little bigger. So recall that when we visited this, not only did it print this to the console on the server, it also returned it to the browser because of the res.send. Okay, mission complete.